Welcome to the Infinite Surface podcast. I'm Jesse Thompson. For today's episode, we have two exciting announcements. First, we're welcoming our guest, Glen Lavert, whom I'm very excited to speak with. But before I introduce Glen, let me announce that with this episode, I'll be introducing a new co-host, Chris Blockus. He'll be joining me on most, if not all, future episodes. Chris is one of my oldest and dearest friends, one who I've enjoyed endless winding conversations with over the years, all deeply thoughtful, meaningful, enlightening, and funny. Chris is an art enthusiast and a history teacher whose insights into history, culture, and aesthetics will do a lot to expand the conversations that we have on this podcast. His joining signals a move in the direction of my overall goal, to discuss art in context, not only the context of making and learning, but also a larger historical and social context that tells the stories of those that live an art life. In line with that, our guest today, Glen Lavert, has a long, diverse, and interesting art career. I met Glen years ago when we both taught part-time at the Bristol Community College in Fall River, Massachusetts. That job was my first real college-level teaching position, while Glen was already a well-established teacher there. While we only knew each other in passing then, Glen was almost an embarrassingly popular teacher. The students spoke glowingly about his classes and assignments and stories, and his artwork and life in the art world preceded him. I really got to know Glen later, though, through Facebook, where his posts about art and life were as enjoyable as they were challenging. It's safe to say that Glen is no fan of Donald Trump and all that Trump's legacy has brought to or amplified in American culture. And part of Glen's time on Facebook was spent interacting and, in a sense, investigating Trump followers, posting his opinions, and sometimes posting his reflections of the interactions he was having with some Trump advocates online. Glen became particularly interested in the issue of gun rights, and seemingly has had endless energy to engage in a conversation around it, even with those that bring a less than rational approach to the debate. Glen's research into the gun debate and the rhetoric around it has culminated in his publishing of a paper called Guns Are Alive: How Design and Technology Literacy is Missing from the Gun Debate in America. He presented it at the Design Incubation Conference in 2019. Later this year, an exhibition of Glen's sculptures, drawings, and paintings related to this research opens. It's called Internal Ballistics: The Design, Politics, and Human Toll of Firearms in America. The show opens September 15th through 28th at 5 Points Gallery in Torrington, Connecticut. Today we'll talk about Glen's art, his time working for Saul LeWitt, his teaching, his recent artwork, and his upcoming show, and much, much more. So without further ado, let's welcome Glen Lavert, and for the first time, our co-host, Chris Blockus. Welcome everybody to the Infinite Surface podcast. We're here today with Glen Lavert.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, so we have two people to introduce today, and I don't know what the hierarchy of introducing people in video podcasts is, but working today with Chris Blockus as a co-host, and this is his first time on the show, and I've asked Chris to come on and join me as a co-host because Chris is one of my oldest friends and a great thinker, a great talker, and a historian, teaches, well, not a historian, but a history teacher. Is that right, Chris?
Yes, that's right. Historians too much credit.
Yeah, too much. Well, you have to have written a book or be messing around with original documents, right, to be a historian. So
That's right. Different job.
Yeah. So okay. So you're a history teacher. And Chris and I are always having great art conversations. So I was really excited to invite him on. So welcome, Chris.
Hey, Jesse, how are you? And Glen, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. Great.
Yeah. So Glen, you just finished the semester, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah. Well, not just. I think it's probably been about a month now, right?
Yeah.
So that was good. Although the first month is always sort of catching up on, non-art things that you left behind.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Now I'm antsy to get back into the studio. So.
And you're teaching at the new school, is that right?
The new school, yes. And also I teach at Central Connecticut State University. So
Okay,
it's
right.
2 gigs.
Yeah.
I don't remember the last time I had one gig, one job.
Well, Yeah, that's the nature of a part-time teacher, right?
Right, exactly.
What's the most amount of classes you've ever had at different universities?
Whoa. Let's see. I feel like I must have been teaching 7 or 8 classes all at one in one
7 or 8.
term.
Wow.
Yeah, I was at Bristol Community College.
Yeah.
I probably had 4 or 5 there. I might have been at Brown and had 2 classes. And I was also doing a thing where I would travel from BCC to New York, and I had 2 or 3 classes then. So in the range of 5, 6, 7 classes. I don't know. I've lost count.
And when were you doing that?
Too
That
many.
sounds like a young person's thing to do.
Not that young. Probably like 2011, 2012, something not
Okay.
that, maybe 10 years ago, a little less.
Yeah. How was that? Because that's one of the biggest conversations in adjuncting, of course, is low pay and too much work and not being able to actually pursue your art career. What was that like, jumping around like that? Is that a fond memory for you, or?
It's yes and no. I mean, it's
Yeah.
an interesting sort of gig, in the sense at the beginning of the semester, it's like, oh, this is great, this is fun, you're going back and forth between the different places, even just the commute into New York City. You see the Empire State Building, everything's, sort of magical. And then by the third week, you're like, shit, I don't want to do this anymore. This is so much work. It's like by the end of the semester, I'm laid out flat. It's like, just really difficult. It's hard.
Yeah.
The community.
That skyline loses its luster really fast.
It really does. Yeah. I mean, it's nice to see the first few weeks, and then with all that commuting, and having to, bounce around everything else, it can be difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Chris does that commute every day, right? You're taking
Yeah,
a train
right.
in from
Thankfully,
Jersey.
that literally
And you have to take the New Jersey Transit.
Yeah.
The infamous, yeah.
That's an added layer of terrible right there.
Yeah.
I think.
It's the most hated commuter line in the country.
It can be tough. I've been on that. I've done that a few times.
You're on the Northeast corridor, I guess, Glenn, right?
Yeah, right. I go in from
Premier
New Haven
train
down.
line.
Yes and no. It was better when they had a bar cart.
Oh,
they don't have that anymore. But I've gone into New Jersey. As a matter of fact, when I first started teaching in New York, I would drive into Jersey to meet up with somebody, and we would travel in together from, I forget where, probably like near Newark or something. Your face was plastered up against the windows, and it gets pretty busy.
And what's your commuting like now? Because you're working at 2 different schools. So you're living in Connecticut, right?
I'm in Connecticut, so it's a little closer than when I was in Providence, and working in Massachusetts. So so that's good. But with the pandemic, everything was online, and frankly, I really love that.
Yeah,
I'm gonna miss it. Yeah. It was there are things that are missing in online instruction, obviously.
Yeah.
But the commute part, I'm not gonna miss at all. It was really kind of nice to just grab a cup of coffee and head down and start up.
Do you think once things get back to normal and you're back face to face, do you think you'll keep some of the online content?
I would like to. Yeah, probably. I mean, it's already set up that there's a lot of instruction that has to go on through like Blackboard or Canvas or whatever. So, which has its ups and downs. So I imagine there will be. Also, I think as far as Parsons goes, I think they're leaving it up to the student whether they stay home or they come to campus. Okay. Which means if I might have students in China who broadcast in, so to speak, at the time of class. So and the classrooms are all set up for that, which is kind of nice. Yeah,
that's a hell of a financial decision that student can make. I mean, they could be saving like $40,000 just on travel and living, right?
Yeah, that's true. These students probably don't have that much to worry about.
Okay.
Yeah. they're already
Noted.
going to Parsons or the new
Right, fair
school.
enough.
It's,
Yeah.
you know.
So thinking of your art, Glenn, because I do want to talk quite a bit about the art you make. You make so many different kinds of art. I feel like I don't know if wear a bunch of different hats is the right kind of way to say that. Similarly, I draw, I paint, I sculpt. You do the same.
Right.
And do you think of that as like wearing different hats, or do you think of that as like all the same stream of consciousness, just different media?
A little bit of both, probably. I mean, because I waver to such extreme differences that I have to be very aware of, the material application. You know what I mean? Like if I'm going to weld, I have to be very aware of that. This is extremely different than, say, painting or drawing. You know what I mean? Actually, it's not that different from drawing, but painting, it's very different from painting. So yeah, but at the same time, all the work has to have like a conceptual continuity, I think. So somehow it all sort of fits together. I rather like work that's kind of patchy, it's not just one kind of material or one kind of, if you could kind of find different avenues for the expression.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of both, I guess.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so how did you start? I mean, can you bring us back to the origin story of Glenn? Like, how did you start out? Were you drawing when you were a kid? Were you an art kid at all?
Definitely. Yeah, both. It's funny. My brother is also an artist, and a lot of people find that strange. That somehow, in every household, there's the artist, and then there's the lawyer or doctor.
The antithesis, the nemesis.
but not in my house. My parents were very, very accepting, and let us go for what we wanted to, and so we both do art. But I would do drawings and I'd play with clay from a very early age. But I was also a musician. So I kind of decided once leaving high school, to go that route, the music route. And quickly. Yeah, I did that for a little while.
Did you study music or
yeah, I went to Berklee College of Music
really
for a bit.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's where I realized this isn't for me. Because they were really teaching, and actually it has a lot to do with how my feelings on education in general. I mean, they're a very loose school. They teach rock and roll as well as jazz and whatever classical. They're known as a jazz school. But in the end, you really have to know your stuff. They need to teach you the theoretical basics. You have to know your keys, how to arrange things. There's a lot of technical know-how, and that's just not the way I learn. I usually just figure out the technique as I'm working. If I need to do something, and I've done that with art. The difference being is that I've just been doing it much longer. So I decided it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
Also, being in a band, you have to deal with other personalities. And after a while, that gets old.
That's really interesting because like the way you're phrasing that out, talking about like, because so many artists do this, right? They conceptualize in a way, not necessarily conceptualize first, but the material makes the meaning, right? So the a lot of artists don't necessarily need to have mastery over material just to dive in and make it during the process of it. Do you think that translates at all to music? Is that, or is music a much more prepared study?
No, I think it depends on the music. I mean, if you look at punk rock, or even like hip hop, with hip hop you could sample stuff and just anybody could do it in a way. What I mean? It's really hard. Obviously, you gotta have some sense of vision, but you don't have to know what the modes on a scale are. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to know that stuff. And punk rock's the same. 3 chords and you're good to go. Maybe 2 chords. And you scream into a microphone and you've got yourself, something going on there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's the same. I think there's a lot of parallels between music and visual arts that I see, that I like exploring in classes too. one of my at my Parsons class, one of the first projects, or depending on the semester, is to make a song. And all these students are like, whoa, you know, like we've never, but it's all sampling. I tell them, find your favorite songs, we're going to sample from the songs, and then I'll show you how to build it, you know. So there's degrees of difficulty and degrees of know-how, I guess.
So going back again to your origin story.
Right.
So you're in music school, and
Right.
was there a moment or an event or something that sort of made you go in another direction, or slow burn?
No, it was gradual, you know. And I also found that I really liked doing notation, which is, before computers, you would have to take, you know, a score and draw it out really beautifully so that everybody could understand it. You know, if you look at a composer's or a musician's score, it's like a doctor's signature. You know what I mean? Like, what the hell is this stuff? And but I really liked translating it and making it look really pretty. You know what I mean? And I realized, oh, I should have gone to art school. You know, this was a mistake. But then I took some time off. I did, after school there. I took some time off, and I decided to go back into art. I went into a community college, and then went to a state college, and I realized what I really wanted to do was teach. You know, not just make art, but, you know, I'm not of the economic bracket that I could imagine myself going to New York City and schmoozing and selling, and you know what I mean? So I thought teaching could be a good, you know, tandem kind of thing to do. And so I decided, you know, I'll get a better job if I find a better school to go to, if it looks good on the resume, right? So I went to RISD.
Okay.
You know, so I mean, there's a variety of schools I could have gone to, but RISD was really had all the things, artistically speaking, had all the things that I was interested in.
Yeah. And you were in sculpture there, right?
Sculpture, MFA. Yep.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I really that the way you're talking about that really resonates with me. This is a little known fact about me, but after my first year of art school, I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York.
Oh, right.
Just for my foundation year, and then I could not afford that anymore. And I transferred to the College of New Jersey, which is just an hour train ride away in Trenton, New Jersey. And that's where I met Chris, actually. Chris.
Right.
And I was having a sort of, like, I don't know, sophomore year mid art life crisis or whatever, you know, that kind of like, I'm going to quit art kind of thing. And I really loved physics at the time. And I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'm out of the arts. This stuff is killing me. I'm going to go for physics. And so I took physics. You know, I went over to they have like a big engineering school, so they have, like, you know, proper physics program and everything. And I took physics 1, and it was such an amazing class, and I loved it so much for like the first 3 weeks. and then it started getting smart. and there's like no way I could catch up with these guys. And so really quickly I was like, you know what? I'm gonna head back to the art school where my talents are appreciated.
Sure,
and
yeah, that's kind of how it felt, right? Yeah. You know, I would be in, like, they have ear training in music school, where you'd take a sheet of music and you'd I mean, I just laugh thinking about it, because who the hell does this and just sings it? You know what I mean? You just sing what you read.
Yeah.
I'm like, that ain't happening with me. You know, I learned an instrument, but you would hear the other students in class, and they just gorgeous voices, and they would just, even if they weren't vocal majors, you know what I mean, they would just sing it, and you're like, I was just, you know, you'd feel out of place real quick, you know.
Yeah.
It was a different way of learning. It had a different sort of you know, ladder of achievement, I guess. And I just decided, but I took an astronomy course once because I was interested and I could understand the physics part. I remember in the lab portion of those classes, I'd be the last one, you know, trying to figure out the mass of a star, and it'd be like, and the teacher was really great. She would just sit there and wait for me, and I would get it and I would nail it, but it would take me like twice as long to do it as all the other students.
Yeah.
It's
but
hard
when I got
stuff.
done with that physics class, I took the last test, and they gave us about the full class like about an hour and 10 minutes, and by the time that hour and 10 was up, I was on like the 5th out of 10 questions, and everybody else had been gone from the room for like 35 minutes. They just smoked that test, got 100 and got out. And I was like, that was all I needed to know. I was like, okay, I understand my place in the world now.
Totally, I get that. Yeah.
So you're at RISD, and so you spent your 2 years at RISD Sculpture. And so were you strictly working on sculpture there? Was that like a very sculptural period, or did you?
Yeah, I think very quickly in undergrad, I decided why paint.
Yeah.
Like to me, paint started becoming like clay, and I was just like, like an ape throwing crap on, just throwing shit on canvases, and it just became like the buildup of the paint. And I thought, what, let's just come off the wall, right? Why not? And so I did that, and I quickly went into sculpture and started, trying everything out. I tried welding and wood carving, and I think I've probably done most things that one could do sculpturally. And even RISD has a really great program where you can, there's iron and bronze pouring and all this. I took glass blowing because you're at RISD.
Right.
You got to do that, right?
Yeah.
So
Chihuli's famous glass program.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
I met him once.
Yeah.
He's very round. Yeah.
and
I shook his hand.
Eye
I shook his
patch.
hand, and it was
say,
like a globe.
Did he have
What was
both
that?
eyes? Did he have both eyes at the time, or just one?
No. Yeah, just one. But very round and pudgy hands.
Yeah. Well, they have to be strong if they're gonna be glass blowing.
I guess so. He doesn't do his own, so
yeah. I at the Grounds for Sculpture, and this is my Chihuly story. At the Grounds for Sculpture, they had a Chihuly show, and I was working on the installation crew at the time. So we were pretty, involved in bringing the artwork in and getting the artwork out. But the Chihuly stuff is so specialized. It's not like they sent us some paintings and we hung them on the wall. So they had their own installation crew come. And so when the show was over, we were there to help them pack up the Chihuly work. And they didn't pack it up. They break it and they remake it every time. And so they take a big trash bag and they disassemble the pieces, and they put all the pieces in the trash bag, and they put a broom handle in there and smash it up. Because apparently it's just more tedious and more expensive to actually properly pack it up and ship it and probably break it, that way, than it is just to remake it and ship it for the show.
Wow.
So at least that's how they do it. That's how they did it then.
Right. Huh. I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that blew my mind. I was like, no way.
Right. I mean, he has a whole team, so.
Yeah, a giant team. And I was like, are you throwing all that out? Can I have that bag?
Yeah, team was huge. Yeah, I went to a huge exhibit in Seattle, and they had pictures of the team at work. I could not believe how big it was. It was enormous.
Yeah.
I mean, he stopped glass blowing early on, I think, because of the accident, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine blowing with one eye. I don't know, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. Strange idea, but anyway.
They had it reminded me of actually almost like Saul LeWitt. Like, I was looking at your CV and was very impressed that you worked with him. But like they showed his drawings that were like just scribbles, and then
the scribbles,
the team had to like interpret them. I thought that was cool, if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, he had, all around the world, he has these, he would have like 4 or 5 managers, or maybe it's less, maybe 2 managers or around the world, and they would travel, and then they would like get whoever's in the area, mostly students, art students or whatever. But those works are really great. I have some friends who worked on those. And, the great thing about those is Saul sort of let them just do whatever kind of scribbles they were inclined to do, depend, as long as it kept within the sort of formula of his idea. Yeah.
So when were you working for him?
I worked for him in 1996 or 7. I forget exactly.
So that's
which.
before RISD? Yeah, that's before.
Oh, yeah, that was before RISD. Mostly before RISD. I did a little bit once I went to grad school. I mean, I was like the only grad student working, which again, economics. But yeah, mostly during my undergrad, I was there. So I was working at a gallery at the school, and then the director of the LeWitt collection called up and asked for some people because they were moving their warehouse facility to a larger location. It's amazing what they had before compared to what they have now. But so I was one of the first hired for that. And so I stayed with him for about 8 years or something, 10 years almost.
Yeah.
On and off. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was the capacity you worked for him? It was just assistant?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I worked in his studio. Like, he was extremely prolific. So we would go in there and we would if he finished because he would do a lot of his own work, right? So he would do a lot of painting. He would call them drawings, but they're gouache on paper, on really large sheets of paper. We would go in there once he was finished, catalog them, photograph them, trim them up. There's some good stories around that, but trim them up nice for, whatever galleries, and then, roll them up or package them or whatever, and then get his next set of papers up to go for, the next day or the next week or whatever it was. And they were usually really large, and sometimes he would go small. And but he also has a huge collection, like a massive collection of other artwork. So we would get traffic from like the Met or, the New Museum or, the Centre Pompidou or anywhere. And they would come and visit because they wanted to do a show of his work or somebody else's work or a combination thereof. And we would have to, trot that stuff out and make sure the things were cleaned, and restoration and storage. I mean, it was a lot of sometimes tedious work. I don't know, anybody who does museum work, can understand the pain of doing a drawing that catalogs every little detail, of what's wrong with it. Here's a crack at the left inch corner. You know what I mean? It gets really tedious, but there's also great fun times too.
So was he a collector in the way that he was actively visiting artist studios and also reselling, or was he just collecting because he likes art?
I think a number of things. Probably the first thing is especially he was he's sort of blue chip. So, galleries couldn't afford when they got the money, instead of giving the artists, when they sold work, giving them money, they would trade actually and give them.
Wow.
Well, we have this Donald Judd. Here's the Donald Judd. You know what I mean? So it's sort of amassed that way, but also because he was a really good friend to a lot of artists, and he was trading all the time. He would every holiday he would do, or even if he was traveling, he would do postcards, draw on them, send them to his friends. They would do that same thing back. I mean, he was just constantly making things and, sharing with other people. He was really generous in so many different ways. But one of them is that he was so close to a lot of younger artists and helped them along,
Yeah. Do you have any favorite stories from that time, or that come to mind?
Boy, that's tough. There's a lot of stories.
Well, I remember you cataloged some
I could tell.
Oh, sorry. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I did. And some of them, it was for social media. I don't know how. He would, the funny thing about Saul LeWitt I mean, I'm sure a lot of people imagine, because he's a conceptualist, very, or minimalist, whatever you want to catalog him as, but very refined, clean looking artwork. He wasn't that pedantic. He I remember for his retrospective, he didn't really want to spend a lot of money on cleaning up some of the older paintings, as much as they were gorgeous paintings. So he would come around and he would just lick them and would be like, crap. That makes it even worse. He had sort of like this very nonchalant way of treating his own work in a way, which made it probably better that he had assistants to take to whisk it away,
before he licked all of his drawings clean.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stories. I mean, the one thing I say the most about him is that he's really the most generous human being I've ever met. Really? Just with his time, with everything. I mean, during the holidays, he would give you one of his works, which is like, worth like a car. Like I get a car with anything. You know what I mean? So, and he would give you like, CDs because he was an avid classical music fan. So he would give you some things that he thought you would like. He would give you a bottle of wine. There's all kinds of stuff we would get as gifts. But probably more importantly was just, his support.
Yeah.
And you would think a conceptualist would like, I think it's a misnomer to think that artists like just the kind of things that they are into or what they do. I remember having a really weird like tank piece. It was like a drawing in a tank kind of a thing. And he thought it was funny. He was like, that's really cool. It's funny. That's yours. I'm like, yeah. And it was nothing like what he would do,
right.
But I don't think that really mattered to him.
Yeah. Is there something, I feel like I'm asking questions that I would hate to be asked myself, but is there something that you feel like you were like the one of the biggest lessons you learned from that experience? Because I feel like that's a pretty special experience that it sounds like you guys were great.
He was in that world that's just too far away for me to get to. You know what I mean? Like he would be on the phone with people from the Met and, who knows who else. And what I learned is that's like, as much as I probably knew it before, that's even more removed from my world than I could have imagined. But the nice thing about him was he was not like, he didn't behave like he was of another world. He was very, like I said, generous with his time. He was very supportive. So I learned that, but there were other things, like in terms of art history, I would drive him around. He didn't know how to drive. So I would drive him to I know. Well, I think because he spent most of his time in New York City, so he didn't have a need to drive, right? So once he moved back to Connecticut, he had people drive him around, which was fine. It was fun. It was always fun driving him around. Although he didn't like it if you drove fast. There's a lot of good stories about that between me and the other assistants. But he would tell me how, like back in the old days, he was roommates or studio mates or whatever with Robert Smithson, right? So they shared an apartment and they only paid like $50 or something a month, or maybe it was less than that. And I was like, oh, this explains everything. And he would say he doesn't understand how young artists do it now. It's just too expensive. And this was even then, it was like back in the early 2000s. Now it's gotten even worse,
Definitely so.
Yeah.
Now we can say that. Now we can say I don't understand how young artists do it.
But maybe the other thing is to be open-minded and generous with your own time. Like his own generosity pushed you to be generous. Like I trade stuff with my friends and other people, and so I think that's really the biggest thing I got from him, that generosity.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a really nice story. And are you in contact with the people? Like, was it a community of people that worked there for a long time, or?
Yeah, we it's sort of piled, year after year or whatever.
Yeah.
I even got my brother a job, so he's still there actually. Now that Now that Saul passed away some years ago already, the estate is still going. There's still lots of Saul LaVert shows, and the collection has to be maintained. So he's among a small group that's still there. But at the time I was there, it was a pretty big group. We were sort of like an art family, you know.
Yeah.
And Saul was like the grandfather, and you know, we were the little kids or whatever.
Yeah. I don't remember if I told you last time, but there's actually a Saul LaVert in the school. So in the ADM is the school I work for. It's Art, Media, and Design at the Nanyang Technological University. And in their gallery, there's a Saul LaVert right now. They just installed a show that I think it's called Drawing the Line, you know, artworks that sort of, you know, extend the meaning. Yeah, it's one of the like large circle drawings that are made with like a large crayon.
Oh, yeah. Those are hard to do.
Yeah. And you know, yeah, go ahead.
Well, that was another thing we had to do working for him, is like he would do a lot of plans, you know, he would do the wall drawings, you know, and then we'd have to get them mailed out to the assistants. That was, you know, a key thing that we would do, you know. So we got to see all the different possibilities and all the different things that he did. And then it was always fun to see how other people would make them, you know.
Yeah.
What were you going to say? I'm sorry for cutting
Oh,
off.
just the guy. So Mark Glaude, who is my colleague, and he's the one who curated the show, and so he's the one that executed the large circle drawing. And he had practiced it a few times, and he said the hardest part of it is to keep the tool in contact with the wall well enough, because it's really grinding down as you make these big marks, and it's just wearing down into a little nub. Plus you're really like fully extended, you know, all the way back here. So it's quite more, I don't know if difficult is the right word, but it's like more challenging maybe than it comes across.
Yeah, that's
taxing.
True.
Yeah. Have you seen these in real life or no?
Have I seen them in real life? I may have seen one in real life. I watched a whole. I'm a huge fan. I watched a documentary, I believe, about it, and read you know, books with like large renderings of them in it. It looks very taxing to create, and I think the plan idea is like, I had a a big ongoing debate with my ex-wife's mom about it, and she was an art teacher, and is an art teacher, I guess, and she was I don't want to say she was less of a fan, but you know, she was very into process, you know, her own process and things like that. And I've always been a much more conceptual person. It's how I teach too. And so we would have a friendly conversation about it all the time.
I mean, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Glenn. Sorry.
I was going to say, you know, Saul is actually really into process. You know, I think it's a misunderstanding that he just sits at a desk and draws things.
Yeah.
Shoves it to people. I mean, he was constantly doing his own drawings and even sculpture to some extent, you know, and then making plans. You know, it was, you know, it was really. I think he saw it probably as somewhat collaborative in a way. You know, like there's a great video of him saying, you know, that he thinks that some of the fabricators are better than him at drawing. You know, and he likes that, I think.
Let me take that back. Actually, I have seen a bunch of them. I went to an exhibition, or maybe it was in a museum. I don't remember. I remember being affected by it, though. It was it had a lot to do with color. It was like a room size thing with a bunch of color in it. I really was impressed. I thought it was great.
Yeah, the big ones are really just fantastic. There's the at Mass MoCA in Massachusetts, there's a huge like 3 football field sized floors of Saul LaVert, and that definitely ranks among the most fun exhibitions that I've ever been to in my life. And I put him in the same category in a way as James Turrell, the light artist, in that like it's a full-on almost amusement park experience. Like it's a very, very engaging full body experience. And you know, the Solowits, the amazing thing about that Mass Mocha exhibition is that you become completely immersed in them. Like they fill up your entire vision. And so you're just in this world, this endless world of his scribbles and marks and shapes and color designs. And it is so fun. I would recommend it to absolutely anybody to take a trip up there. It's well worth going way out of your way to see that exhibition. It's really special.
I remember the day he got a model in the mail of that building. Right. It was in his studio, and he was tinkering around with what wall drawings should go where, and he had like little cutouts of the wall drawings and little people, the little architectural things.
Yeah, some architectural guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was like really giddy over it. He was like really thrilled. He's like, this is gonna be great,
Yeah.
So
he went into God mode controlling.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. And just the way he works anyway is like, he would have different versions of this wall drawing or that wall drawing, and he was really sort of working on that, and that was fun to see. It was good, and it was great to see it in real life, like to see it in the beginning of the inception of it, and then boom, there it is.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Speaking of experience stuff like that, Glenn, some of the things of yours that I was most struck by were the experiential pieces that you've created. What goes into what goes into creating an experience like that for you? How do you conceptualize that?
Usually I try to think about user interface, like a lot of I guess it's kind of complicated to explain. I always have like a statement to make, right? So if this is my statement or whatever, so how do I bring the audience or the viewer into the piece? And to what extent? What's their role in it? And why? So I have to. So I think at the beginning I was probably doing more like, really junky inventor, bad welding sort of things. Sort of like I'm very fascinated by Victorian objects. They're like, because they're like they're the least economic problems, the solution to a problem, right?
Yeah.
They're like these big wheels, and they've just got all these things going on, and they're, they do the trick. But I think what's great about them is all the sort of the steps it takes to get to that point, right? So I was kind of interested in that sort of thing for a bit, and doing really weird looking objects that way. So that's probably what the experiential aspect was. And then I wanted a little more, like I even have one where you would, I keep thinking about reprising, doing a new one, because I had to throw the whole thing away. But there was one where you'd climb a ladder and you'd stick your head into this cone-shaped thing, which is sort of an extension of the ceiling. And then when you look into it, you're surrounded by model trains lit, sort of like a cosmos of, and it had a lot to do with, what did it have to do with? I don't even know. No, it had to do with sort of, the small and the big, this giant universe, but starting off as like a very small kind of like an entrance or breaking through that membrane, a small object. Like I would have some object where you'd look into, and then the world would open up, kind of a thing. So, and I think those were sort of influenced by my, some of my experiences with the astronomy class that I was taking, this kind of cosmos that I was interested in. So that's what those were about, I guess.
So your work more recently seems to have taken a more overtly political bent. Do you feel like you've always been political in your work, or do you feel like that's been a move that it's just become more apparent?
No, I've always been. I think it just manifests itself differently. A lot of the earlier work, even those experiential things, had a lot to do with environmentalism, or
Mhm.
you know, some of the early pieces were like almost like animals, so they were sort of like what we do with, you know, industrialized farming of animals and that kind of a thing. But they're less overt. They're the statement of that is not there. It's in there, but it's sort of, the idea is that it should wash over you, not sort of, you know, point at you,
Yep.
which is a little different than the work today. I think I'm a little more pointed, but maybe it's just because of the subject, I think, you know, which is,
Yeah.
you know, guns, you know. So I think the subject determines the reaction. I guess.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get it. Yeah, you know, I'm a history teacher, and that's something that I've struggled with. I mean, my entire career, but as we proceed more and more, just how overt I become with my students. You know, and do you allow the sweep of history to wash over people, or do you point people in a more direct, you know, more obvious direction? What's your philosophy with that on students?
With students, I haven't had to be very pointed, you know what I mean? Like I didn't,
Yeah.
I mean, partially because they're art students and they're already fairly, you know, they're pretty progressive minded for the most part. So I mean, I haven't, but I mean, I think the times have changed so much. I mean, I remember when Trump was elected, none of the teachers were saying anything. I think it was just like sort of like the entire school went on depression mode, and you know, and nobody was talking about it. And even the students were like, they were almost like really timid and like just waiting. Are you guys going to say anything? And I did. I wasn't going to hold back, you know. And I, you know, it was, we took maybe like a whole hour or so just talking about that and what it meant and all this sort of thing. So I think the times, you know, required different tactics, maybe, you know, and certainly throughout the entire past 4 years. And I would even extend that, you know, into the Obama administration, because there's been a lot of intensity going on, you know, between the citizenry.
Yeah.
You know, so I think, and my art has been a little more sharp for that reason, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Do you feel like?
Yeah, go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just gonna say,
Zoom, man.
hey, man.
Go ahead. Finish up.
Okay. I was gonna say, what was I gonna say? No, I was gonna say, you know, I've been, I forget actually. You go.
Well, we're not editing that part out. We are not editing that part out. Stays in.
What responsibility do you think politically that the artist has in times like these, or do you think that there's no responsibility?
I mean, I don't know that there's no responsibility, but I think what that responsibility is up to the artist. You know what I mean? And the degree to which you go after those subjects is really depends on the artist and the art itself. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a really tricky thing. You know, there's a difference between propaganda and art in the sense that I think art is more layered, right? There's more, or it should be anyway, you know, even didactic art, you know, if it's really good anyway, should have something else to grab onto, you know what I mean? Some other kind of elements that talk about the human experience. And I think all art in a way is political for that reason. You know, it's all about us, you know, and we're in America, you know, and because of that very reason, art is, you know, very, you know, it questions the status quo. Just as its existence is sort of like, it questions everything that's, you know, of, you know, a sort of conformist society, you know. So I don't know. I think I'm really reticent at saying you should, to any artist, that you need to make political art. You know, I think it'll come out, whatever. If you have to say what you have to say, in an honest way. It'll come out in whatever way it needs to, I guess. I just felt, for me, I felt it was, the responsibility.
So how is that feeling for you, Glenn? Because I mean, the transition. I mean, I've made some pretty pointed art in the past, and I feel like the way in which the artist has to deal with the response from the viewer is really different. And I know you're online engaging with the political other side, I guess is the right way to put that, quite a bit. But even still, even on the same side, the intensity ramps up quite a bit whenever you make something that's as pointed as some of the gun works that you're making. For as beautiful as they are, for as ornamental as they are, they still have that very kind of clear anti-gun message, and that's backed up by a lot of your posts and a lot of your the language and the things that you're writing too, right? You recently wrote a paper on the design of guns and stuff like that,
right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how has that been like how has the mood of making art for you been shifted from, something like you're saying, the experiential piece where I mean, I don't know if it's the right way to put it, but when I'm imagining, I've not seen that piece, I've not popped my head up into that cone and seen those trains.
Right.
But and it's not a value judgment at all, but that sounds like a more fun artwork than the gun stuff, right? Like for the viewer. So how is that to like kind of step into that world of politics, which is quite serious, quite dire? And like, is the mood different for you, or is it equally as?
No, the mood is different. It's weird.
Yeah. It's weird. Enough said.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the earlier work, even the drawings I was doing after grad school, which were about things, I became very interested in objects, everyday objects, but they were more whimsical and fun, even if they were about environmentalism, although some of them could get pretty heavy. They still had, a kind of fun attitude, although it depends on your what you think fun is.
True. Yes.
One of the side effects I've had, especially posting the works in progress, is that I'll post a gun picture and I'll get all these like gun fanatics, not to denigrate, people who are really into gun rights and have guns and shoot guns. They're like, that's cool. All you got to do is put a skull and a gun together.
It's the formula.
And that's fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I guess it does depend on that. Although I did have fun making them. I went around to different museums and went into their collections and, had them bring out firearms for me so I could draw them. And I mean, it was a different kind of thing. It felt more like a thesis, like the gun thing, which I feel like I'm sort of wrapping it up and I'm getting it ready for a show. But I feel like it was like a thesis in a way, as opposed to just, I don't know, fooling around, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it. And that's why I did the writing. I don't want to do writing. I
know the feeling.
It's not always, I mean, it's good to have that skill so that you can, for yourself at least, sort of understand the mechanisms of what you're doing. But for something, especially this, I felt like I had to write something because, it's such a important topic, or certainly, contentious nowadays. You know what I mean? And my thought on it had to do with the things rather than a lot of the other political, the gun as an object. And I felt like I had a different point of view that I didn't feel like was really out there yet. So I felt like I had to do it. And that was spurred on by Sandy Hook. I was on the train to Connecticut on that day, and it was dead quiet. Nobody said anything. Where usually, like from taking the commuter rails, it's like it's like a party sometimes, and it was just not, it was really somber and pretty awful. And I thought, that was a day I was thinking to myself, what am I supposed to do? What can we do? What can we say? And the only thing I really have is making art. So how am I gonna do what I have to do to help with this?
Yeah.
Right. And if I have this point of view, I should put it out somehow.
What year was Sandy Hook?
Sandy Hook was 2015, 2014. I forget.
Okay,
Maybe
so you've been on
I
this.
should know. I wrote it down, obviously, but yeah.
There's a note somewhere. Yeah,
It was a good,
notice.
yeah.
But
was
you've been
in
on it for
December.
7 years already.
Well, no, what happened? I had to stew on it for a while because I had no idea what I was going to do.
Yeah.
So I was making other work at the time, and then I thought, well, it came to me in a sort of literal way. I was at a gas station, and there was a guy in front of me who had a gun on, tucked into his pants, but it was showing. And you're not supposed to, concealed carry might be okay in Connecticut to some degree, but not open carry. So I thought, and the argument that is often used about the good guy with the gun and the bad guy with the gun came to mind. And I thought, which one is this guy? You know what I mean? I don't know him.
Hard to tell.
So impossible. So I thought, I left. I thought, I'm not going to find out. I'm just going to go. He's probably a good guy, but how do I know, really? I mean, it's a gas station. You could hold the place up, right? So I left, and I thought, started thinking about all those different arguments in the debates, especially the ones about well, the one that really hit was the guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? That was the one. And, I started doing some reading of Bruno Latour's. He's a French, Canadian or French, I don't remember, philosopher. And he was interested in sort of technological, materialism, different things like this. And really discussing what are these things in our lives, that they're not just ordinary, inert, inanimate objects, that they have a relationship with us, right? That relationship starts with our design, I think, right? We design them to do a particular task, or maybe several tasks, and then we engage with those things. They come to life when we start to use them. And I felt like there was no other object better to represent this than the gun, which has like the worst design intention that you can imagine. I mean, it's to kill, so that was my take on the subject.
Yeah. And what did you discover about the design of gun? Is that easy to summarize, or is it?
Well, I don't know about summarize. It's the design of all different kinds of things, even cars, there's an evolution to these things, and the sort of that evolution really changes history, changes today, like the gun as a weapon wouldn't, at first it was really used for protection of property. But the thing about that was, you could, there were muskets, and, you might miss. You probably will miss your target, but it was kind of a good warning, I suppose. But you could still get looted or whatever, your sheep could get whisked away. But it became, with German and American technology, and especially I would say with rifling. Rifling is the sort of in the barrel, they have that groove. That allows the projectile, which obviously they're bullets now, but they were like balls. But anyway, they would pick up on the groove, and they would sort of really keep their aim true or truer as time went on. So nowadays we've got really we went from a kind of small cannon in our hands that may or may not hit something to this tiny little metal projectile that will go right through anything you aim it at. And big difference. And in terms of history, that changed everything. You think about slavery, the Second Amendment, was partially written around that, the idea that we should arm these special police to round up our slaves. That was a if it wasn't for some of the technological advances, you wouldn't have those things. You know, we might still have bows and arrows, which would be weird. You know?
Yeah, I was. You're talking about that argument. The guns don't kill people; people kill people. The argument that a gun is just like any other tool is so fundamentally untrue, because every other tool that we've ever created has had a purpose to help us. Whereas the gun is the only tool that we've ever created with the express purpose of killing. That's it. And I was so struck by especially the piece that you did with that made the Kalashnikov look like a Hydra, and I thought that was giving it that organic, that living quality that it had its own kind of purpose or its own intention. I thought was really, that whole thing was very clearly communicated. I thought it was great.
That's good. I started off with those. I just sort of took design, exploded. I'm very interested in sort of different kinds of illustration, botanical illustration, mechanical, exploded drawing. So I found a bunch of exploded, mechanical drawings of different gun types. And I thought that was a perfect place to start to talk about the design of guns, and then superimpose that with, those were all digital drawings because I was sort of holed up in a computer lab. So I thought this is a perfect time, to do this sort of digital collage. So I did, different sort of demonic characters with these gun designs, right? So and as the series went on, like the Kalashnikov was great because we know the designer very well. He's very charismatic, sort of look to him, and so that was fun. But later, as it went on, I started, talking about like the Sandy Hook thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like with Columbine and some of the other events that were happening, I started using those as subject matter for those particular guns. And then later on, I felt like I reached an end of that, and then went into studying guns in person. Particularly Colt firearms, the early, thinking about, if, revolvers were one of the first inventions that allowed us to shoot, in rapid succession, which seems to be a great sort of mechanical predate to, the things we have now, which shoot like 30, 40 rounds, right? So I studied and I live in Hartford, or outside of Hartford. I was born in Hartford. So I felt like that was a good sort of tie-in to my own past, or my own heritage, I guess, in a way, to study Colt's firearms, which are gorgeous, and that becomes one of the conundrums of this thing, is this sort of tension between, and it might be the most interesting take on the whole subject, is the elegance, the beauty of these things, but then the knowledge of what they do, right? So I would see these beautiful firearms, and some of them are commemorative and they've never been fired, or maybe, but they still perform the task. But some of them have been fired, and you have to wonder, who's on the other end of that one, right? We're looking at it in a museum, and it's beautiful. It's a great thing. It's worn in a nice kind of aesthetic way, but then we have to think about what it does and who was killed by that, how many, for what reason, right?
When the museums show that kind of work, do they ever, are there, because I've not studied guns, I've seen the collections, I've gone through those rooms, but are there guns in existence where they say like, okay, this gun was used to, execute X, Y, and Z person, and that's like held special, or is that not really a practice? Because I've not ever heard of that, but
there is actually a tension between factions, museum factions, about that very idea. So some of them, one of the problems with that anyway is like, how are you going to know? Who are you going to, what I mean? It has to be a very important event, a very specific subject who had the gun, and a very specific subject who was shot by it, right? But, in those cases, maybe a more, forward-thinking museum or curator might go for that kind of thing, while others wouldn't. I guess, I think it really depends on the way that it's displayed and
Have you
why
seen
it's
any
displayed.
that list
No,
the use?
not yet.
Hmm.
I look once in a while.
Yeah, because
I do.
as you're talking, I'm thinking like, I mean, I see your point where you're like, well, it'd have to be a very specific person doing the executing and a very specific person being executed. But there's like a lot of examples of that in history, right? Where I don't know if a gun would be made so ceremonial just for that purpose, but certainly there's a man with the job and a tool
Sure.
to be used, and it's got to be that those are around, but now that I've never thought of it like that before, but since you're talking about it, I'm noticing that I've never read that, in the same way
Right.
that we read other texts in museums about the use and the history and as
Right.
much of where it came from as possible. In the arms and armor section, it's kind of sneakily missing that information.
That's true. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, partially because it's hard information to get, but I imagine,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know how you would get away with it if you had like Wild Bill Hickok's gun. I mean, you have to,
right.
or somebody like this, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Or Billy the Kid's gun
Yeah.
or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'd have
Right,
to,
right.
that would have to play into the display somehow. But anyway, that was an interesting conundrum between those. That tension was really interesting to me, and that's where the larger drawings came from.
Yeah,
So I would do these really more realistic, very intense drawings of almost like I see them as portraits, actually. Portraits of particular guns, and then I superimpose them on them. That possible missing, tragedy, right? And in accordance with what's going on today, there's school shootings and domestic shootings and police killings from the arrests or whatever, things like this, things that are bubbling up in our discussion, and then superimposing this older kind of almost like time travel, so these two different time frames together.
yeah. And since you started the conversation framing it, well, not exactly framing it, but we started discussing Sandy Hook, things like that, and those kind of tragedies, and so now you're discussing these kind of like more ornamental guns, or guns that have more beauty. But a lot of I mean, at least in my opinion, I don't know how you feel about this, but the guns that are being used to commit some of these crimes or that surround these tragedies, they're not guns that really hold terrific beauty. They're not ceremonial guns. They're super utilitarian. And I think I remember you talking a little bit about how sort of like almost it's like design on steroids in a way, where they get close to almost like what water guns look like really fancy Nerf water guns or something. They look cool.
Yeah, that's true.
And they use this kind of design aesthetic that is seems to appeal to the same kind of person who loves GI Joe toys or something like that,
or Rambo, back then.
So did those play into your art at all? Like, did you do any works that revolve around that kind of ugly design, or that kind of I don't know if that's the right word. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't, because I feel like there's a lot of people doing that already out there. I feel like those artists out there that are using that, and it's a very obvious design, the AR type designs to discuss. And I think they're out there, and I don't think I have anything to add to that discussion. In the writing, I do talk a lot about those design concerns, because I do have kind of a muscular kind of sci-fi kind of thing. You know what I mean? They're almost like Geiger.
Yeah.
If he did guns, that's what they would look like. You know what I mean?
Right.
And more. But that aesthetic appeals to a certain audience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if I want to, make the connection between the aesthetic and the problems that we're having with guns, but maybe there's a little. I don't know. I just wanted to, a lot of my work, even the stuff we were talking about before, like with Victorian inventions, I like taking old stuff, new stuff, and sort of jamming them together. I'm sort of like interested in the time travel aspect of what art can do in a way. So that's why I went towards the older kinds of things. Also, I wanted to say something about, did we lose Jesse?
No, I'm still here.
No.
My
Okay.
camera just switched off though. Sorry. So sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I was talking about, you know, the evolution of design, and I felt like I had to go back to as far back as I could, you know, to where guns still look like guns and they look like weird looking cannons, you know. So, but they discussed something about the history of America and the Wild West, or you know what I mean, and a lot of that stuff. I felt like I could pull from that and get some really charged subject and you know, superimpose that onto what's going on now. I'm not really I mean, it's sort of an unfortunate subject. I didn't really want to discuss guns, you know, as an art subject, you know what I mean? Because that's terrible, right? But and even worse, that it led me into all these different arguments and discussions, and you know, there's lots of interesting points on all sides. But I feel like my argument is that they kill, and either you're okay with killing or you're not okay with killing, and that seems to be the end. And people might not like that, but I don't really care.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm thinking often about how it is that your work is read by some of the people that follow you, but maybe don't agree with your politics on Facebook. Because you mentioned earlier that, you know, some people might see your work, or you said like see a gun, see a skull, and just be like, that's cool. Right. And I'm wondering, you know, in the Bruce Springsteen, like, you know, Born in the USA kind of way, where, you know, any politician will grab that song and play it. And Bruce Springsteen, I feel like, is constantly just like, don't use my song for that. Fuck.
I know.
So,
yeah. I feel for them.
Yeah. So, you know, are you feeling that way with your work, where, or what have the interactions been like where with whoever, you know, is reading your work online?
Well, with the gun rights crowd, you know, I do get the misinterpretation, you know, the Bruce Springsteen moment, and there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I think I've had enough of the argument to know that the argument can't be had. You know, and I think maybe that's part of what art, you know, I think the problem I have with my own work at this point is the gun work anyway. It's fairly didactic in some sense, and I'm not comfortable with that. I just felt like I had to say this and in this way, but at the same time, I don't know. I hope that there's something more to them that people could get out of them. Although, you know, there have been some more astute opponents that I've had interesting conversations with, and none of them, you know, they either, if I give them the ultimatum of either you're for killing or not, they'll either say, maybe not that surprisingly, yes, I'm okay with justified killing. I've had that. Or others will say, you know, that's a good point, but, you know, I'll have those. And that's okay too. You know, I don't, you know, one of the problems with this work is maybe the aim of the work itself is that it'll be obsolete someday, hopefully, right? Like, who will care about guns? And I'm this weird guy who did this work about guns, and, you know, it's pretty, you know, uneventful, and nobody cares about it anymore. And maybe that's okay. Right? But knowing enough about guns, I don't think that's going to happen, you know. And design, you know, we design things based on our bodies, on ourselves, and guns are so much like us as our, in different ways, our bodies and our, you know, the way we think, that I don't see them going away. It would be nice to, well, I think just to maybe to wrap this part up, you know, I think it's a gun fetish that we have right now, you know, that's been sort of, and I don't blame movies or video games necessarily, because I think those things speak about our culture already, right? Like, if those things weren't already in our culture, they wouldn't make movies or video games about shooting people up, right? So at the same time, you know, the conundrum of those things is it also, you know, gets the snowball going down the hill. So I would like to see the fetish maybe die down. There's a lot of
Yeah.
politics to that. I think it's a
Yeah.
fetish that we have.
Did you develop any kind of fetish for it? I mean, obviously from your posting and your talking and the message of the art is pretty clear. But I feel like it's easy to have an appreciation for the beauty of the object and the beauty of the machine. So is that, do you feel like that's developed in you? Like, do you feel like you have a greater appreciation for it or a greater disdain for it? Or how do you feel now that
A little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, the art of the making, even just like the metal that they had to develop a very specific kind of blue metal to withstand the heat, just those kind of the design elements and the aesthetics of it, like on the old Smith and Wesson and Colts, you'll have these beautiful engravings. Then if you look at those engravings, they're like of Native Americans getting killed, or you know what I mean? So it's like, oh, right. So you might appreciate the beauty, but it reels you back in pretty quickly if you're really paying attention. I did a bunch of things after that particular works, which were a little more aggressive, or they were like gunshot wounds. I sort of wanted to remind myself what this stuff does, not just getting caught up in the thing, but what it does. And so that pulled me out of any appreciation aesthetically for the gun, the human toll.
What do you think is at the root of that gun fetish in our society that doesn't exist elsewhere?
Ooh, that's the trickiest part, I think. I think it has a lot to do with, well, in terms of power, right? This sort of relinquishing of basically a white male centered power, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing probably. But then also something having to do with, and it's related, I think, how do we deal with our feelings, our emotions, like how do we solve problems that aren't just, I'm gonna whip out my gun, you know what I mean? How do you solve a problem that is so caught up in one's sort of ideal of masculinity and power and violence? Violence is a tricky thing. I mean, you could say that it's something it's inbred in all of us to some degree, but we're sort of in a moment where slowly but surely we're trying to relinquish that part,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's sort of all those things, the echo of all those things happening.
Sometimes it feels like to me, especially living abroad for a while, that Americans on any spectrum of politics are decidedly libertarian. And I always thought of myself as not. And then I came abroad and I met people that really weren't libertarian at all.
Oh, right.
And I realized just how fiercely, in some ways, like in some certain circumstances, I would say, fiercely libertarian I am. And even if it just comes down to the concept of like feeling entitled to argue with a police officer, like that kind of urge. And so I mean, does that resonate with you? Like, do you feel like that's part of, because I feel like the manifestation of that ultimately is, well, I need to protect my liberty. And, some of us feel that liberty threatened more than others, whether that's rational or not. And the ultimate way to do that is to arm yourself, right? And even if it's against an imaginary foe. So, I don't know, that's where it sort of lies in my headspace at the moment, is in that libertarianism. And I was shocked when I moved abroad to find out how many moments I myself, who never considered myself to be that way, show up kind of in that way, like that. Yeah.
It's a weird sense of individualism that America has. You know what I mean? It's if you go even to Europe, let's say, their idea of individualism, if you think about existentialism as an individualist ideal, their version of it is still sort of like, we're in this together.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
there's a greater sense of a responsibility to society, or being a part of a community or civilization. If you don't like the word society, sometimes the word civilization works. But and in America, we don't seem to have that. And I think it's really deep in our psyche. We kind of came here on, I feel like, and Chris would probably have a more nuanced version of this, but we kind of came here on two different platforms. We had the Puritans who came here, self-professed, ostracized. They came here and they were sort of alone in this world, so they had to, that's that individualist kind of sensibility in there, the Puritan sensibility. But then there's also the sort of capitalist, the never do well, I'm going to go to America and make my fortune kind of a thing. And that fortune happens to be something that's gotten, if you're an individualist, apparently, right? Not through the hard work of lots of slavery. You know what I mean? So like things get really messy, but I think those are two really distinct but important tracks that are embedded in our history.
Yeah.
And why?
Yeah, I agree very much. And just the I don't think that you're wrong that Americans are pretty libertarian, and it's a shock when you enter into a society that's not that way. But there are different ways of handling that, and we've chosen a fear-based one, that we fear that people are going to take things from us, and therefore we need to harm them in order to do so. It doesn't have to be that way. You can approach others not afraid of them, and you can still say, these are my, I expect that I'm going to be treated in a certain way without having to kill somebody in order to protect that.
It's a very extreme reaction to your individualism, right? I mean, like to kill. Rather than to just, I have a list of people ask me, what happens if somebody breaks into my house? Well, I've made a whole list. You could get an alarm, you could get a dog, you could run, you can hide, you can, call somebody. I mean, there's just like a giant list of things that you could do instead of kill them first. You know what I mean? Like even if you have to get, even a knife is a little less, you know what I mean? Like, the thing with knives is that you have to get in there and physical, so most people aren't going to do killing with knives. Not that it doesn't happen, obviously, but I think it's a better warning than, say, using a gun, which is an ultimatum in a way. But there's a whole host of other things you can do before you use a gun, I think.
Yeah.
We go for
if we were more,
Yeah, go ahead. If we were more what?
If we were more caring as a society, then if somebody broke into your house, you could just let them have whatever they wanted, and you could just get it replaced. Like we could take care of each other.
Right. Well, but everybody's under the impression that they're not coming in to take your TV, which is if they're coming in at all. Like, who's targeting you? You think,
That's
right?
exactly
really,
right.
I don't understand that mentality. But anyway, let's just say that it happens. I do happen to have a friend who, while he was out, he had surveillance cameras, which is among the things on my list. Who caught these guys break into his house, but they weren't coming in to kill him. They were taking stuff out of the house. So, I mean, that's one thing you can do. Let them have it.
Not escalate. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's really, I think, propagated out of this conversation is this perception. Like, I think, Glenn, you were putting it in an interesting way where you're like, if they're breaking into your house, if they're coming to kill you, which is like to say that the average American isn't experiencing that super often. But the perception is not that, in my experience anyway, hearing other people's views of America based on what they hear about it, they take that very, they have that sense that everyone in America has guns, everybody. And I'm often finding myself reminding people like I don't know I know anyone, like my uncle has some. uh I think that's almost the end of the list. Like there's almost no one I know that has guns, and it's been that way my whole life. And so and that's like confusing for them to disabuse them of that idea that like every American's got a number of guns and they're already training their kids to use them, or that we're constantly experiencing crime, and that if they come, they will experience crime.
Right.
And so that perception is tough, because I think in some ways it's true, and it's super important that those issues be discussed, but the way it's being perceived is I think right now, the debate, the debate of not hypotheticals but of instances is just being taken as like day-to-day, minute-by-minute life. And then again, that paranoid feeling that you're talking about, where you're like, well, I better get a gun because someone is gonna break into my house and try to kill me. That part is, I don't know, like I think that is what's translated out of this conversation sometimes.
Yeah, I get those students too. They just got to America, they're in New York City. New York City, it's funny to say, and they think everybody's got a gun, and they've got to be they're usually kind of afraid. I had one student who was like, I'm a little afraid. I'm like, why? Because there's a lot of gun, I mean, it sounds like there are with the media and everything, and they're atrocious when they happen, but it's like it's happening. It's like the OK Corral on every corner, which it's not.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I was in New York City visiting about 2 years ago, and it was winter time. I flew in from Singapore, and so I'm kind of bundled up. I'm wearing this coat that I have still from high school. It's old, and it's kind of beat up. So I have this big coat on. I got this like kind of scully cap on, and I got my glasses on, and I'm waiting to meet a friend, and I'm on, maybe like around 32nd on the west side of Manhattan, just kind of busy area. And I'm just leaning up against a wall, kind of cold and waiting. And this young girl walks up to me, and she's probably about 22. She's by herself, and she's a tourist. And she says, would you take my picture? And she hands me her cell phone without even a second thought.
Yeah.
And so I took it and I ran. No, I'm just joking. But I no, but I took her picture. Yeah, I was like, I can't believe I just lucked out like that. Oh my god, best day. But but I handed it back to her. But I thought, my god, that never would have happened when I was a kid, because you were taught like, okay, you go into New York, you watch your back, you don't go to this area, you don't go to that area. And it was very, it was dicey, right? Like you could find yourself in a wrong situation. And that, I think New York has changed a lot in that way. It's demonstrably safer in many ways. And so, that was a sign to me like, oh, the word is getting out that there's a little bit more trust, or block is that kind of compact, or that kind of contract that you were talking about, where you said, well, I can expect other human beings to treat me or deal with me in a certain way. So she just handed me her phone and said, okay, this will be fine. And it was. But that was like a shock to me, because growing up in that area, I grew up in New Jersey, and it was just, you were taught like, be careful.
Yeah, I remember those days too. I mean, even just seeing pictures of New York City was very different. It was small, lots of smog, and it was a dangerous place. I remember hearing stories from other people. They would go to the subway. There's one story, I forget who told me this, that he had a cup of coffee, he was in the subway waiting for it, and some guy came up to him and just took the coffee and gave him like a threatening look and walked away. That was it.
Power move.
I'm like, that's New York in the 70s and 80s. Yep.
I feel like there's like a 90% chance that guy was just like auditioning for like a villain role in a movie and was like, I need to practice today.
Right. Now it sounds like a Dada thing. It sounds like a performance thing. Somebody was taking video of the whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So Glenn, I mean, talking about this stuff, because there's kind of, in my mind, in this practice that you have now, or at least in this series that you have now, there's kind of two aspects. There's like the making of the stuff, the showing of the stuff, which is always, but there's this social aspect and engagement that came with it, with partially from the studying of it, which is kind of the fun part, but then the reality of that is almost, inevitably being dragged into the conversation. And I know you have so many of these conversations online, and I admire your patience. And I remember I sent you once a note, because I decided to like LaVertu for a day, and I saw something online. That's a verb.
No.
Did you know that? to endlessly argue on Facebook with the oppositional viewpoint is to
What's
LaVertu.
The Groucho Marx thing is I don't want to be a member of the club.
Exactly.
Have me. Go ahead.
But anyway, I just got into this conversation with really oppositional voices, and it just kind of wore me out right away. Like I was like, there's no way I can keep this up for more than like 3 minutes. And I right away wrote you a note, and I was like, man, Glenn, I hope you're doing okay. I just have 3 minutes. So I mean, where do you see yourself going with? Like, are you continuing? I mean, you're having a show coming up, and so is that kind of a capstone to it, or are you going to continue it? And if you do continue it, can you continue this pace or these conversations?
In a way, I feel like this gun work, at least I'd like to. Although I did have a thought the other day, it'd be really nice to draw this or whatever, this other gun and what. But then I canceled that out of my head. I feel like I've said as much as I could say, and I don't know that I could push it further. Do you know what I mean? It might be too. I feel like this has the right amount of whatever it is that it needs, and that I need to move on, which I have been. And it's equally as political. I'm starting to do work on education, which you and I have had lots of discussions about too. So
good luck.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing. But anyway, in my head, I've got all these new things going on with this other idea, and I'm trying to wrap up. It's weird to be in between, because you still have to put a nice little bow on the last thing you did, and then move on to the next. Your brain is already on the next thing.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm done with the guns. I don't know. I feel like maybe they'll stand the test of time in terms of the argument. Maybe they won't. It's not up to me. Yeah. But I have some interesting things, and we'll see.
So can you plug your show for us a little bit? Because I feel like this is a good opportunity.
Yeah, so it'll be in September. It'll be in September in Torrington, Connecticut, which is a very rural sort of ish place. The Torrington itself is pretty cool, and maybe not so incidentally, John Brown once lived there. Anyway, so it'll be in Torrington, Connecticut, the 5 Points Art Center Gallery, whatever. I'm bad at names. I'm also bad at PR. But so it'll be the mid-September. It'll be called, I've been stewing with the name. I think I'm settling with internal ballistics, which is a term that describes the study of what happens to a bullet inside the chamber of a gun, which is basically what this work is about. So that it'll have, not all the work is going to be in it. There's a lot of work. So a lot of the, a little bit of, because the work itself managed to go through different forms. So there's a little bit of everything. There's sculpture as well. I took a sabbatical last year around this time for making those, and gladly they're finished, and so they'll be in there as well. It'll be nice to see the work together.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful title, by the way. I mean, I think it metaphorically really works for the kind of conversation just that idea of the path that the bullet takes, as it travels through the machine. It's a pretty nice one. I think you landed on a good title there.
It took a while. I think I had some pretty bad ones for a while. Some heavy metal ones. They were like,
Well, yeah. What were the worst ones?
Something like Machines That Kill, or I don't know, something like that. Right? It was something really bad and dumb. Although, I kind of like that kind of kitschy stuff sometimes.
Yeah, I feel
So-
like you should just go on Facebook and ask for suggestions and just pick the worst one. Just
Right,
pick
yeah.
5 of the or that should be like one of the one of the pieces in the show, or one of the like little text pieces is
Sure.
like other people's
Yeah,
suggestions.
oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe I'll do that. That'll be fun.
See how people perceive the
For
opportunity.
sure.
Can I ask you, since you're moving into work on education, it
Yeah.
looks like when you teach, it looks like you do it in a very collaborative way. You have a lot of collaborative projects. Is that part of your educational philosophy?
Yes and no. It's my answer for everything, isn't it?
It's the only
I'm-
answer for everything.
Especially, I know. So for like projects, I've done it before, and I'm sure students who have seen this will be like, you made us do a collaborative project, because students generally hate collaborative projects.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
and they usually don't come out that good. But
Yep.
I'll have them do things that are both, in the sense that they collaborate on the process, but their outcome might be individualistic in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
And it totally
I think
makes
that's-
sense. I think it's the best way to
I think
do
that's
it.
it's a better way to go. Although as a teacher, it's kind of fun to watch the personality drama with collaborative projects. I still remember them well. But yeah, I think my philosophy on education is a little more open-ended. I'm not like, it's funny to talk about all this gun work as being didactic. I'm not as didactic with education, and I think that's one of the weird things about doing the practice and this new work that'll talk about education itself. Yeah, I'm sort of a Dewey, John Dewey fan,
Yep.
So, or even better than John Dewey is Bertrand Russell. He's got some, like, I feel like he takes John Dewey even further, in terms of education anyway, maybe everything, but there's something beautiful about what they talk about, the individual and learning, and that I think is missing in schools for the most part, or at least, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm a teacher is because I had such bad teachers.
Yep.
Especially growing up in grade school or whatever. Oh, I also went to Catholic school, so I had nuns.
Oof.
That's much worse than having just a bad teacher. But I had such a bad experience that now I feel like I want to explore how to sort of do the opposite. What is it that we need to do that's the opposite of that?
Mhm.
And what about Dewey and Russell is like kind of floating to the surface? Can you go into that a little bit?
Russell had something, and I forget the exact quote. It was something about like what you really need to, for teaching, the most important thing in teaching is love, right? And I feel like, if you really love those students, as they are as individuals, you really sort of give them, it's almost like parenting in a way, like, that's a kind of teaching you don't really hear about much, you know what I mean? And I'm sort of interested in that. Dewey is interesting because I mean, he's sort of on that, but he never actually says it. He sort of leads towards this differentiated experiential sense of education that I think we should be doing. We need less teachers, or more teachers, but less students per teacher.
Yep.
Because I've loved all my students, but there's a lot of them, and how much better would their education have been if I only had 5 of them at a time instead of 18, or, in high school or grade school, 20 to 30 students seems incredible to me. It's like, it's this weird industrialized version of teaching, just pushing out students. And of course, education itself has become so corporatized that that's really what it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's followed the same trends as the rest of the economy. It was designed to be industrial when we were industrial, and now we're it's all capitalized and corporatized, and that's what it's become there too. And yeah, it's absolutely shameful. It's not good.
Yeah, and in Dewey, it's Dewey and Russell, but there's a lot of other ones like Paulo Freire, and God, there's just so many other figures that really take a stand for education, really talk about it as a human, there's like, we talk about healthcare, needing healthcare, but we need education just as much, mental healthcare, taking care of our minds, being as human as we can be in that way. And, it's really one of the most human experiences you could have. I mean, we never stop learning, do we? I mean, we shouldn't anyway. It's life in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I stopped learning about 10 years ago. So that's my joke.
Starting to forget.
I don't want to know anything anymore.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Yeah. I that's my joke, is like, I only teach. I don't do any learning anymore. That part of my life is well over. Not interested. No, I'm joking.
It's actually one of the things I love about teaching is that I learn from them as much as they might learn from me. I imagine they do. I don't know. But I feel like I learn a lot from them. And it's not just intergenerational, I think it's personal.
Yeah. Yeah. The portion of, at least in the artistic sense, the portion of maturing as an artist that happens while teaching, I think is confusing for people that perceive like the teacher-student relationship as like master-pupil. I think it's a confusing issue that's not well expressed in the pedagogy or in the like assessment rubrics. How it is that very healthily we can continue to be like teachers and lifetime learners at the same time, while at the same time offering real guidance and real stewardship for the students. But it's a thing, again, reflecting a little bit on teaching abroad for a while, that teacher as master thing, that dynamic it's not too intense here. It's not. No, it's not too bad in some ways. But the students don't challenge the teachers in the way that an American student would feel free or encouraged to challenge you. So even if you ask them to, there's kind of a boundary of respect that the students will just automatically afford you, and then therefore maybe not contradict you, even if you beg for it. So that part's kind of interesting, and I see it pop up quite a lot here and it's an interesting thing because, of course, the difference when you're teaching between pedagogy and cultural differences is very confusing when you're teaching abroad, right? Because you say, well, is it correct for me to impose this kind of attitude or this kind of way of dialoguing on this kind of person who's very, I don't know, like personal way of being in the world is in disagreement with that. So it's a tough question to answer. It's impossible on the fly, and it's especially impossible when you have to roll assessment into that, right? But anyway, is that something like how does that pop up for you in the US? Because at this point I've not taught in the US in 6 years, and I think it's really, it's interesting because I was here right when Trump was elected, and I was in drawing class when I got the news because it's 12 hours ahead. So it was like noon for me when I found out, I was in the middle of foundation drawing. And I think my students saw my face change. I said, what's happening on your phone right now, Prof? But I've not taught in the US during that time. So do you feel like the students have become more vocal, like more careful? Like how do you think that's affected?
No, I don't, not any more so than say when you and I were teaching at the community college. It's an interesting, I think there's a funny thing in America where there's still a little bit of the master apprentice, or maybe there's the want to have that, but then it's not the same in how it carries itself out necessarily. Do you know what I mean? Like they'll question you if they feel like you've crossed a line they didn't understand. Do you know what I mean? They'll say it. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it's changed much in the years that I've been teaching. And maybe that's because of the way I teach, which I don't really know how I teach. I I'm sort of, I think I come at it with the idea that not that there's a hierarchy there. Maybe I know a little more than you, but this is meant to be a two-way channel. You know what I mean? And treating them that way, I think, as with as much respect as I can, I guess. I don't know. So maybe I don't get too much blowback for that reason, possibly. That could be a question for someone else.
Maybe so.
I don't know. Yeah, it's funny to think. I always thought the whole master apprentice way of teaching, especially in the arts, was a little strange. It really comes out of a kind of a capitalist tradition. You think about like in Italy, having donors pay for your work and assistance, and you would learn through that. I just feel like we're sort of in a weird position where our society or the capitalist system tells us that's what should be happening, but things aren't happening that way. They're much a little more different than that.
Well, I think though where that seems to pop up the most in my experience is in conversations around skills training, and so the I think, how to say this, like idealistically there should be like perfect integration between the conceptual aspect and nature of art making and the skills required to do so, or required to realize those concepts, and the distinctions that, or the old kind of argument that conceptual art is this, and whatever the opposite of that is, sometimes it's representational art or skills based or something like that, is something else. That argument doesn't hold much water. That kind of like duality or that kind of framing doesn't hold much water for me. I don't find it very useful. But it does kind of show up in the pedagogy where if you are trying to develop a particular skill set, like you were talking about welding earlier, I teach drawing all the time, and I teach it for animation, and especially in that world of illustration and animation, where certain tool sets or certain conceptual understandings really only come through just like repetitive training. So that part is where it kind of shows up, like the master apprentice stuff, because there ends up being in some ways right and wrong answers. Whereas in the more conceptual way, or the teaching philosophy you talked about before, there's no right or wrong answers. You're just spending time with someone as they exercise their mind and utilize their art tendencies to materialize something, right? So that's, I mean, do you teach skill classes, or do you find that's part of your
I teach drawing a lot, so there's a lot of skills issues with that, so for sure, right? And it's funny, I'm really on the fence on all that in a way. I understand the use of skills, but I think, Leonardo happened already.
Right.
I mean, I think maybe you should be you.
Sure.
I think you learn as much as you can, but then pull away from it and let yourself come through somehow. And that's the hardest thing to do, I think. I don't know. It's funny. There's still that tension between those two worlds, isn't there? Like there's the faction of conceptualists versus the faction of realists, or whatever they are, and then the rest of us in the middle are like, What do we
Right.
do?
Yeah, like we're just making art over here. No interest in
Yeah,
that.
right. Yeah, I mean, and often I don't understand the argument. It's
Yeah.
like, well, you're both cool for whatever reason. So
Right.
get over yourselves and just I don't know. I think there's a lot of power involved. Like I taught illustration too, and there's a weird tension between fine arts and illustration.
Yeah.
I saw one of your videos where you're talking about, that illustration was a derogative term, right? But inversely, I think illustrators feel like they're sort of hurt by it, so they're just as willing to push fine artists out of their world,
Right.
and it's unfortunate. I feel like, especially those two, I feel like illustration and art has so many blurred. All the interesting stuff happens in those blurred territories.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That who cares after a while what's illustration or not?
Yeah.
Or a fine art. Those are all designations for like selling art, I think, at some point.
Yeah, art market stuff for sure.
Right.
Not interested.
Right. I mean, it has nothing to do with the art, actually. It's just sort of, there's a lot of peripheral stuff going on, and it bleeds into the academy, so we have to deal with it.
Yeah, that tension, that distinction is so interesting because in my view, or in my world, like I just teach and I just make art, and I show it when I can, and I there's really not too much of a hustle going on in terms of like trying to involve myself in the art market or something like that. But the interesting part is that the public doesn't perceive it like that, right? Like the public perceives it as those things being the same thing, and so for for the artist, I feel like it's a much different conversation, because I always quote what Chuck Close or however many other artists have said the same thing, but it's like I just get up and go to work, right? Like, I don't wait for inspiration. I don't wait for sales. I don't wait for museums. it's my job. I go in, I work. That's it, and
although he might wait for sales. I mean, or not wait for
well, at this point, yeah.
He's got it lined up,
point,
yeah.
So
the public perception is strange, though. It's caught up in all the other systems that we have of commodity and
well, one of the most interesting things that I noticed about that duality, and it shows up all the time, but it showed up really nicely, and by nicely I mean really not nicely, when oh god, what's his name? I lost the artist's name. Paints like big, large rectangular canvases with like Barnett Newman, single stripes down the sides. And I think about 6 years ago, or maybe something 8 years ago, he sold one of his paintings at auction for $5+ million, something like that. And see, even in my explanation now, even coming from an artist who cares about this stuff, I'm still saying it wrong, right? Because he didn't sell anything at auction.
He made nothing.
The auction house sold it, but there was this huge amount of what's the word for that? Like, flack or just lots of conversation online about how this guy's a scammer, how this art is like bullshit, how this artist is bullshit, and basically accusing the artist of running the scam. And I thought, and it's like, Barnett,
how long has he been dead?
It's like he's not part of that 5.4 million or whatever it was at all. So that's such an interesting thing to me, like the tendency or the ability, I would say, for the public to blame the artist, to see the artist as like, at least sometimes as like a scoundrel, or a snake oil salesman, right? And then, and I don't know if that's just coming from the kind of like 1960s American art trends, or if that existed before.
I think it came before.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you think about the Puritans who came here, the whole idea behind them is to distrust imagery of their belief system or any imagery, really. You know what I mean?
Right.
The only way images, paintings, or any kind of art came in was through the other group of the somewhat wealthy, Europeans that came here. They needed portraits of themselves, so they got house painters to do those portraits, right? And then so then I feel like that's where it all sort of gets tangled up as well in art, because we distrust art. We distrust the artists, but we need them we need them to get an economy going and to make me look good as a collector, right? So all that stuff happened early, And here we are.
Scoundrels.
And all that stuff is also wrapped up in skill. I mean, I had heard a lot of this argument. I think I was reading something this morning about, I forget what painting it was. Anyway, it was sold for a lot, and it was just, I think it was a Rothko. And the whole narrative around that is a lot of money, no skills, you're a scam artist.
Right. Simple equation.
Right. So that's what we've got, and none of that is true, especially if you're an artist. You can see what's going on, and it has nothing to do with that at all.
And actually I read, I don't think there's a lot of validity. I don't know. I don't even know where I got this from, but I have this sense that the conversation kind of revolves around this, but that the idea was like a contrived one, where basically galleries were like, look, it takes way too long, way too much labor to make these like Alma Tadema paintings or something like that. We need something that's fast, something that's commodifiable, and something that's easy and cheap, and that we can kind of conceptually sell for infinite. And and I don't know, what's interesting about that is that adds up to a conspiracy theory, right? And maybe it could be, but
there's a little bit of truth to it. Sure, a little bit.
It's not a bad observation about what happened. But my question always is, how does the artist play in that? Because the artists are the ones that are, seem to me, at least in my romantic mind, I don't know that much about Barnett Newman, but I just imagine him as like a weirdo who was really, really interested in this kind of art or this kind of advancement in the idea of painting. And so in order to do so, he spent his time in that way. And what was then done with that in terms of art market is just an entirely different conversation and an entirely different way to think about how to use art in the world. So I'm never glad that Barnett Newman's paintings sell for little amount or a lot. It doesn't really register to me how much they sell for. I'm happy they exist. I'm happy that they pushed painting in a direction that it hadn't been before, and I think that's interesting in a lot of ways. But if it sells for more, if it sells for less, that doesn't occupy too much of my thought process.
It's a different world. It's like an alternate universe.
Isn't
it? It's hard to imagine, millions of dollars going for anything.
Well, I remember right after that Barnett Newman sale, a Norman Rockwell sold for $5+ million as well. And I remember the conversation for people that involve themselves in that dialogue between, abstract expressionists or whatever, and representational work, or skill-based and not skill-based. For people that like that conversation or use it as a tool, they said, hey, we're finally back in the game. Norman Rockwell is finally selling with the big guys. And I thought, no, that's, again, Norman Rockwell is dead. That's just a fashion trend. And they're just inverting the fashion trend. So, if you root for it's kind of like, it reminds me of the kind of religious philosophy that says, well, if I'm wealthy, then that proves that I'm good, right? Or that proves that God smiles upon me. And so, if a painting sells for a lot, then that somehow proves that it means something. So when something that's on your team, if you choose sides between those two sides, you say, oh, well, I'm on Norman Rockwell's team. When he's finally hitting home runs at the auction house, you're happy. But for me, I thought, still overpriced.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with the art either.
No,
You
the
can
art
talk
is
all day
infinite.
about.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It has everything to do with the celebrity. I mean, the Norman Rockwell
Right.
sold because it has the name Norman Rockwell,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And the Barnett Newman sold for the same reason, as does Basquiat or Pollock or anybody, right? Or God forbid, Van Gogh. It's like that's the ultimate celebrity name in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it has everything to do with celebrity, nothing to do with the art. I wish people would talk about the art and not the person who made it so much.
Oh wait,
But
but aren't we
that's
not
another...
talking about the art right now? Aren't we supposed to be talking about the art?
That's another hold on. Going back to the beginning, that's one of the things I learned from Saul, is that he was very much like, he hated the spotlight. He didn't go to openings.
Really?
I mean, very rarely, if it was like sort of a local opening, but he didn't go to big ones for the most part. And I learned, the art is the thing that should be the important thing, and the artist is not the important thing. But we have a culture that's completely the opposite.
Yeah. Well, Glenn, that's a really nice note to go out on. The art is the thing, right? I think that's like the theme that ran through this entire conversation. It's the art. The art is
for sure
thing.
Right.
Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for taking us through that. That was really interesting to hear your stories, and it's I've been following you for a long time, following your art for a long time, admiring it. So I'm really happy to hear the story behind it.
Thanks. I'm glad we did this. This was fun.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, it was great meeting you and talking to you. It was great.
All right, Glenn, thank you so much.
All right.
Have a great day.
All right,
See you
bye,
soon.
everybody.